Hello. So I might like to move.
Check, check. Hey, hey.
I'm Jim.
How you doing, Molly?
So,
You can do whatever you want. I just want to get a sense so that, because it's going to, I want to be able to, the wait staff is going to be dealing with desserts and stuff, and I want to make sure it's warm. Nobody. This is just set up. Yeah, whatever he wants to do.
She's been doing that, putting it up and down herself. She's free spirit, so she's going like this, like that. And now she's just talking.
for visibility with this.
She's talking as she has a headset. Like,
What we have
we
is
should explore that with her next time.
so you could be at any of the microphones and you'll be projected onto the screen.
Give me your impression of what you're the secretary of this. I can do any of them.
I'll do my introductions. I'll give this lecture. From that lecture, I mean, you don't have my PowerPoint or anything, but it's up to you. If you want to start at that microphone and then you find yourself. Yeah, I mean, you can.
I have a lava later.
Yeah, you'll have a lavalier if you wanted to move one podium to the other.
So maybe I should start there.
And then this comes out right here. It's designed to stay away from your face.
Right.
The countrymen suck. Those are for actors only. Yeah. Alright, so just get your laptop. That's your break.
Rocco a few months ago, and I walked to the stage and it fell to the floor.
Correct. So you are.
You'll control the on and
Yep.
off. One, two, three, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to the 150th Annual Diocesan Convention Dinner. As any good Episcopalian knows, why just have a meeting when you can have a meal too? That's why we are doing this for the 150th time, so we are glad you are here with us this evening. Before we begin to share this meal together, I would like to call upon the Reverend Ann Kitch to offer up a blessing for this gathering and this meal.
Now, some of you are very advanced, and you caught on to this before lunch. We are going to sing grace, and you are invited to sing it in a round. We thank you, God, for this our food, for life and health and every good. By thine own hand may we be fed. Give us each day our daily bread. We thank thee, God, we bless our food, for life and health and every good. By thine own hand may we be fed. Give us each day our daily bread. Amen.
Thank you, Ann. Please enjoy your dinner. We'll be back in a little bit. Good evening again, ladies and gentlemen. Before I get to do some introductions, I figured because it was the 150th anniversary of the Diocese of Newark, that we'd share some interesting facts about the history of the Diocese of Newark. And just as a little bit of a game, some of these are actually true. One or two of them may be a little bit of a fabrication, and I'm going to leave it up to you to figure them out. The Diocese of Newark, we've had in churches and mission field, mission stations that we've had, there's been over 188 different mission stations and that have turned into congregations throughout the 7 northern counties of New Jersey, throughout the history of the diocese. And there's been a number of churches, and I hear this all the time. Are we the only St. Peter's? Well, no, you're not the only St. Peter's. There's actually been 9 St. Peter's, 13 St. Paul's, 12 St. John's. We've had 16 Christ churches. We've had 12 Grace churches. We've had 5 St. Stephen's. We've had 11 Trinities. We've had a St. Joseph's, that was in Lake Lackawanna. There's been 2 St. David's. We have St. David's Kinnelon. There they are. And then there was St. David's Cedar Grove. Yeah, they're no longer in existence. So there have been a lot of different named churches. We've had, yes, I didn't count the All Saints. There's a lot of All Saints too. And two of the All Saints are over there. So there's been a lot of different church names. One of the really cool things about the role that I have is that I get to dive into down these rabbit holes every day. And it's just fascinating information. The Diocese of Newark, we had 2 large cities through the late 1800s and early 1900s, Newark and Jersey City. Newark had, at one time, had 18 churches in the city of Newark. Jersey City had 13. And in 1889, when they were renaming the diocese from the Diocese of Northern New Jersey they had 2 candidates. Guess what they were? The Diocese of Newark and the Diocese of Jersey City. Guess who won? So those are some of the interesting facts about the names and the different mission stations that we've had. Another piece of information that was very interesting, and I thought about this one today. The longest convention election for a bishop. In December of 1902, Bishop Starkey, who was getting up in years and really felt that his time was nearing an end as the bishop, he was the 2nd bishop, he wrote to the standing committee and said, you need to call for an election. That was in December of 1902. In January of 1903, at Christ Church in what was then Orange, is now East Orange, they had the convention. It started on January 20th at 10:30 a.m. There were 5 or 6 candidates on the ballot, and of course, as you all know, you have to have concurrence. The clergy and the laity both have to agree at the same time. Okay? Keep that in mind. That convention went through not 1, not 5, not 10, not 15, 17 ballots. It started at 10:30 in the morning. They finally threw in the towel at 4 a.m. They decided that 3 weeks later they would gather together to pick the bishop. They were no closer to a decision. Bishop Starkey, 2 weeks later, sadly passed away. He had warned them, but he was not around to meet his successor. His successor wasn't then chosen until June, and that was Bishop Linus, who was our 3rd bishop. So thank you, Bishop Carley, for becoming our bishop on the first ballot. When the diocese was formed, as was mentioned in the video before, there were 64 congregations that came to be part of the Diocese of Northern New Jersey. We were the Diocese of New Jersey for Bishop Crows, Bishop Doan, and Bishop Odenheimer. He traveled the entire length of this state by horse and buggy, and you can look at his diaries. He was constantly on the move. He didn't stay in one place. He was all over the map. Obviously, this got very tiresome for him, and so he went to one of his staff members at the time, who was he'd been there for a long time at that point, very wise old man, and Bishop Odenheimer went up and said, "Cecil, I'm traveling too much." And Cecil said, "Well, divide the diocese." So they divided the 7 northern counties, became the Diocese of Northern New Jersey, and the Diocese of New Jersey stayed the same. So that was one piece of information. The other piece of information, that right about the same time that the diocese divided into 2, was right about the time that John Taylor invented Taylor ham from pork roll. Bishop Odenheimer, I firmly believe it was Taylor ham. So, Bishop French, I hope you have some records down in the archives in New Jersey that talk about the pork roll being so good, because we know it's Taylor ham. So those are some of the history facts that we have for this evening. I'd like to move on to introducing some of our honored guests here this evening. And so I'll begin with our ecumenical brothers and sisters who are joining us this evening. Over here at our ecumenical table, we have the Reverend Javier Barrasso, who is representing the United Methodist Church, Greater New Jersey Conference. Thank you for being with us. We have Father Luke Edeline, the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Newark. The Reverend Steve Houston from the Presbyterian Church USA, the Presbytery of Northeast New Jersey. Father Philip Latronico, the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Newark. The Reverend D. Scott Russell, the Episcopal Diocese of New Jersey. The Reverend Nancy Truscott from the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, New Jersey Synod. The Reverend Joseph Wallace from the Roman Catholic Diocese of Camden. The Reverend Rhett Zabriskie from the Reformed Church in America, the Synod of the Mid-Atlantics. And our ecumenical representatives, we have the Reverend Lynn Blake-Weber, who is the ecumenical officer of the diocese. And also part of the committee sitting with them this evening is the Reverend Diana Wilcox. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. We're glad to have you here. Sitting at the bishop's table this evening, actually, I'll get to that later. Let me go over to the staff tables over here. Sorry, Bishop. Over here, we have Canon man, it's been a long day. Canon Margot Peckham Clark, who's our canon for congregational life. We also have the Canon of the Ordinary, Canon Andrew Wright. Cynthia McChesney, our missioner for stewardship and legacy giving. Nina Nicholson, our communications director, and her husband Kirk Peterson's joining us this evening as well. And Sam Reckford, our diocesan CFO. And at this table over here, we have the bishop's executive assistant, Chloe Caprice. We have the diocesan property and risk manager, Jim Caputo. We have Leslie Thomas, who's our HR benefits manager. We have Cecil Bronner, our Cecil. My wife Pam is here too. And one of a man who's been with us for 16 years, and unfortunately he's not going to be with us much longer because he's going on to lovely retirement. Noel Garcia. And now I'll move to the bishop's table. At the bishop's table, we have the 11th bishop of the Diocese of Newark, the Right Reverend Carly Juanita Hughes. We have John Gard, our president of the trustees. His wife, Allison Gard, who's our chair of the Rules of Order Committee. From the Diocese of New Jersey, we welcome, for the first time to our convention, welcome Bishop French. And then I see our Chancellor, Diane Sammons, and her husband, Tom Savoth, and our parliamentarian, Carol Harrison Arnold, the 10th Bishop of the Diocese of Newark, the Right Reverend Mark Beckwith. And then we have our keynoter for this evening, Jim Wallace. We're very happy to have him with us as well. Okay. And so that's everybody for now. I'll be back up in a couple more minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce to you the 11th Bishop of the Diocese of Newark. She's got some things to share with you and invite some greetings from some of our guests. So it's my pleasure to introduce you the Right Reverend Carly Hughes.
Good evening, everyone. I wonder if you would raise your hand if you were not here this morning, just so I can do a temperature check of the room. Okay. Okay, so thank you. You can put your hands down. So it looks like about 10 to 15% of you, so I'm not going to go in great detail, but I will say to those of you who are not here, this morning, one of the things that I asked from the room before I would start convention is I asked us to make a covenant of safety. And I use that word covenant particularly, meaning that we were making a holy covenant. It was between each other and God to make this a safe place for all people who were here. And I recognize for the 10 to 15% who were not here that you're missing an important piece of the work that we did just to get ourselves started. But let me say again that we're a microcosm of the rest of the world. There are people in this room who are very pleased with how the election went and are excited to see what will come. There are people in this room who are very sad and grieving about how the election went and are dealing with the devastation of that sense of grief. And there are people in this room who are terrified and very afraid of what might come. So we're going to treat each other as if we see Christ in each other. That was one of the things we agreed to that rings familiar to you from the baptismal covenant. And we're also going to treat each other with dignity, regardless of how we voted, regardless of how we're processing. We're recognizing that all of that is us. So keep yourself safe, but keep each other safe. And the way we worked that this morning is first we made the promise on our tables to keep everybody safe, and then we made the promise to keep the entire room safe. So for people who've just entered into this, know that's what you have walked into, a safe place. I say all this because we have more work to do, and some of that is going to happen as we listen tonight. And I actually don't think it is helpful for us to remain silent. I think we have to talk. I think we have to process. And I think we all have to be aware that there are people that we really are going to have to watch out for their safety in very particular ways. And if we're silent, those folks who have the potential of something dangerous happening to them will really think we don't care. Regardless of how you voted, it doesn't matter. That is part of our calling. Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." And right now, feeding sheep means making sure the sheep are safe. So I want to, before we have Jim Wallace come up, there's two guests that I think are excited to greet you and say whatever it is they wish to say. One needs absolutely, though they both need no introduction at all, but it just makes me happy every time I get to say something about the 10th Bishop of Newark, who was so gracious as I entered and probably was really happy about the time I hit my third year because I quit calling him every other week. But it was always gracious every time I called. So Bishop Mark Beckwith would come forward.
Thank you, Carly, and thank you all for your welcome of me, and congratulate all of us on 150 years. I serve in this diocese as 11 years as a priest, 12 years as a bishop, and now 6 years canonically resident but living in New Hampshire. So that's 30 years, and it's about 20% of the diocese's life. And I'm grateful for my time that I've been here as a priest and as a bishop, because my time here formed me as a person, as a priest, and as a bishop. And the conversations that we had, the learnings that we engaged in, the projects that we embarked upon, all of those things helped shape me. And I'm so grateful for that. And one of the great moments for me was turning the crozier over, not so much that I was giving it over, but I was to whom I was giving it over, to Carly, and very grateful that she assumed the role of being bishop in this extraordinary diocese. And to echo what she was referring to earlier, we're at a very difficult time, I think, in our country, and I call upon us to draw upon our history and the DNA of our tradition. If we think polarization is difficult to deal with now, go back almost 500 years when we were created, and the tension, the religious tension between Catholic and Protestant was so acute then. And one of the greatest leaders in the Western tradition, Queen Elizabeth I, said, we are the via media. We are the way in between. So in tension, something new can emerge. We emerged 500 years ago as the Anglican communion, and then from that, the Episcopal Church. That is in our DNA, to walk into the middle of tension and to draw upon the gift of grace and hope and insight that comes out from that. So I challenge and charge you all to continue to do the work that you have done as Episcopalians and to live into this next phase of life. The country is in a challenging place, but we have some history and some tools and some faith that the world needs. Let's use it. Thank you.
I promised the last bishop of New Jersey, who had this dreadful habit of calling New Jersey the mother house. But I promised that bishop I would be as gracious and welcoming to this bishop of New Jersey as Bishop Chip was welcoming to me. He was another one of those people that received a lot of phone calls from me and always made time and space, and I'm grateful for that. And it's a delight. There's no work involved at all in being welcoming and gracious with Bishop Sally French. So thank you.
Thank you, Bishop Hughes. And I had not heard the phrase the mother house before, but I will be sure to keep it in mind for next year and put it to good use. It is a delight and a pleasure and just a joy for me to be here tonight to see so many folks. I've even seen a few clergy from the diocese to the south, so thank you for your show of support to the clergy who normally reside a little distance away. But I am particularly heartened to see so many folks gathered at the end of what has been a challenging week. And I'm heartened to see the community and the fellowship that is shared across the different groups and the folks in this room that I know have perhaps different opinions about what has happened in our country. I still see deep connection, deep fellowship, and deep love for one another, and that is inspiring. I think I missed the part where I realized in advance that this was actually a big deal in the 150th anniversary. If I'd known, I'd have brought a cake. Because that's what you do, right, when you celebrate a special occasion. Now, I will tell you that at my first convention in Trenton earlier this year, Bishop Hughes came and brought greetings from you all to us, and it was lovely to hear. I remember, Bishop, that you shared the image of us as not siblings, but cousins, as we share so much together with the comment, and it stuck with me, that cousins can be closer than siblings in some ways, because you don't always have to live right together, but you always have each other. And you have the ability to be in relationship and connection throughout your lives as partners and friends and companions in with a real sense of kinship and family together. And I was thinking about that a little bit. And I think one of the great gifts of being cousins together is that we get to be together at times of real celebration. And so to be here with you on your 150th anniversary as a diocese, to see the wonderful work that you are doing, the wonderful connections expressed in this community and this gathering is inspiring for me. I delight in the work that you do, in the ways that you make the gospel present. I am inspired by your witness, and we are all strengthened by the connections, the kinship, our cousin relationship that we share. Blessings to you on this convention, blessings to Bishop Hughes, and thank you for the ways that you have welcomed me into this ministry and provided space for me to learn and grow as the newest and the shortest bishop in New Jersey.
It is my delight to introduce Jim Wallace to you. And before I do the official introduction, I just want to say a little bit about how he just walked into the building and started pastoring tonight. He wanted to make sure he met with me before talking with you. We had talked several weeks ago about tonight and the things that I thought were important to be covered, and then Tuesday happened. And what was important 3 weeks ago doesn't seem as important today. And things that we weren't thinking about 3 weeks ago, we're thinking about today. And I'm really struck that our conversation tonight started with him asking, "How are you doing?" And when I said, "I don't know, I'm too busy taking care of it, how everybody else is doing," he said, "I'm not surprised. Now, what do you need?" And there was a piece of me that was able to relax down because I was talking with a pastor. That's who you'll be listening to today. Somebody that wanted to know not only how you were doing, but how I'm doing. And is here as pastor as much as he is anything else. Now, if you followed him along, you know him in many other ways. He is a writer, a teacher, a preacher, a justice advocate, who believes the gospel of Jesus must always be good news for the poor and the oppressed. He's the inaugural holder of the Archbishop Desmond Tutu Chair in Faith and Justice at Georgetown University's McCourt School of Public Policy and the director of its new Center on Faith and Justice. He is a renowned commentator on ethics and public life, a public theologian, and a New York Times bestselling author of multiple books. He will be signing books at the end of our evening. He's also founder of the magazine Sojourners and the community of the same name. Raised in a Midwestern evangelical family, his questioning of segregation as a teenager led him to Black churches and then to involvement in the civil rights movement throughout his time at Michigan State University. Jim's ministry has had an enormous impact, including on many in this room, and I would say on me tonight. Thank you, Jim, for being with us, and we're glad for your time with us.
Thank you, Bishop Carley. Can you all hear me? Okay. So I know that many of you have been pastoring a lot of people this week. Am I right? It's a blessing for all of you that you're here for this time together, because here you need to pastor each other, pastor each other. So I want to start by saying I'm married to a vicar. My wife, Joy Carroll, just came home 2 weeks ago from the 30th anniversary of the ordination of women in the Church of England, of which she was one in the first group. And she had to bring the right robe, of course, and they walked down the aisle of St. Paul's Cathedral. All these women who were first ordained 30 years ago, and the congregation gave them a standing ovation. Joy is also, some of you might know, known in the UK as the real Vicar of Dibley. If you've seen the show, Joy was a consultant to the cast and to the script and became the pastor of the whole TV crew. And she and Dawn French remain great pals and buddies, and I love the story of when she was shadowing Joy to figure out what priests do and all that stuff. And Joy was going to a funeral, the Church of England parish. She did a lot of funerals. And so Dawn wanted to shadow her. You know Dawn French, the great British chef. So Joy said, okay, you can't go in your Jaguar. You got to ride in my Fiat with me, and no one can know that you're there. It wouldn't be fair if Dawn French shows up at the funeral of their loved one. So Dawn French was in the back with the organist, with her big hat on, disguised as the page turner for the organist. So Joy and I have been talking about pastoring in these days. I, as you know, talk a lot about the prophetic tradition in our scriptures, prophetic preaching on justice, on peace, on bringing people together. But I want to share some thoughts I'm going to call rest, reflection, lament, and love. Rest, reflection, lament, and love. Expressing our sorrow, our pain, our confusion, our frustration, our divisions, our feelings of helplessness, even hopelessness, though we aren't supposed to feel that way. Before God is the place to begin after an election like this. It's called lament. It's a biblical notion of how, when you surround yourself before God with all those feelings, and I know you have those feelings tonight, lament is to acknowledge them, to name them, to own them. We are humanly tempted toward despair all the time, but grief is deeper than despair. Grief is better than despair. You have all told many people who have lost a loved one, you've said, take some time to grieve. You've said that, right? Good pastoral word, take some time to grieve. So I'm saying tonight, take some time to grieve. Because grief is much better than despair. I was in city after city before this election for months. I can't even count how many. But I always said there's two kinds of time in the Bible. One is chronos time, regular time, tick-tock time, incremental time, the time that we're in most of the time. The other kind, though, is kairos time, a time that can change time, For decades, even generations, I believed this was a Kairos moment for this nation, but I didn't, and nobody I know expected it to come out the way it was, the way it did. I mean, faith leaders were talking and gathering and getting ready for a close election with protest and legal battles and plans to decertify whoever won, and threats of violence everywhere. Intimidation, voter suppression. I had a call last night with our 50 state clergy leaders from 10 battleground states, part of something we call Faith United to Save Democracy. On the phone last night, we're all black clergy, 50. National black clergy, ready for all the things I just described, none of which happened. And instead of reflecting on what we saw and learned, we just needed to stop and pastor each other. And so many of them told me, I don't know what to preach on Sunday. I see a lot of nodding heads. A lot of you may be feeling the same thing. What to even preach on Sunday? When we are in this place, this moment of Kairos. Now, it didn't turn out the way that I thought, but I'm beginning to understand this really is a Kairos moment. Eddie Glaude, who wrote the foreword to my book, I love it when he says, everything is falling apart and everything is possible all at the same time. That's where we are. And I'm known for strategizing, and people want to know what's next, and I'm deciding it's too soon to do that. So I'm not going to give you a strategy tonight. For many of you, a resistance strategy. We're not ready for that. We've got to live in this moment. Go deep into this moment. Things like take a walk. My wife and I took a walk yesterday, and the phone was ringing the whole time. I just wouldn't pick it up. Breathing that air on the outside. It was so close. And one candidate swept all the swing states, did better than ever in places like New Jersey, won the popular vote, and become, as the New York Times said today, a vessel for so much anger and grievance and fear. A vessel for all of that. So, what do we do? Last night on the phone, I heard black women pastors say, black woman pastor, I'm used to being scrutinized and doubted that I can do this work. I felt that my whole life, but I never felt so rejected before. Personally rejected. Another black woman pastor said, you know, I'm a consultant, I'm a strategist, I'm used to winning and losing elections, but I've never cried before. My heart is broken. And I want everyone in this room, particularly white Christians, to know that every black parent I know is terrified for their children. And one of our pastors had her grandson sitting on her lap last night, little guy. And at one point she apologized for having to take care of her grandson during the call. I said, oh, please, don't apologize. I've been watching him the whole night on this call. little guy, he stayed in the call, and he listened. Black parents are, any parent that is parenting children of color is afraid. That's a fact. It's real. And that's what's going on all over the country. So, how do we be quiet, go for a walk? How do we drink lots of water? Be careful on the other stuff. How do we listen? And how do we, who pastor so many people, how do we find what we need for ourselves? How do we hold each other? How do we, it's a good time to connect with the people you love, especially your kids. The people you love and who love you, and tell them you love them, but you need their love too. To bless a lot of people and to receive the blessings that we are going to need. This is a moment that I haven't lived into enough to know what to do next. So, learning to lament biblically should be our first step now. Expressing all that we feel before God. Rest. I'm telling you, take some time to rest. Get some sleep. Some time to be quiet. Get some exercise. Go for that walk. Go outside. Reach out to people that you love and who love you. Remember that God is at work in our nation, in the wider world, in ways that we can trust, even if we don't feel it or understand it. I'm very struck in all the places I was able to speak over these last several months. How, the original title for this thing tonight was something about Christian nationalism. I spoke a lot about that. False religion, distorted faith, all that. But most of that was going through the teachings of Jesus. One after iconic biblical texts. This book is just 6 iconic biblical texts. That's all it is. Rethinking, relearning, reframing ancient texts for a time like this. And I found people, these students, young, old, all kinds of very diverse crowds, really hungering for Jesus. Hungering for these texts. Loving to hear them, wanting to hear more. And for me, that's the one thing so far I'm thinking that maybe these texts of Jesus can remind us of something we often forget. This movement that we were called into, the kingdom of God, followers of Jesus, this movement was meant to be a minority countercultural movement. A minority countercultural movement. And Jesus, our leader, didn't have many secular wins, did he? He went to a cross. And the other day I looked up at all the, Vincent Harding taught me about the cloud of witnesses, my family of faith. They're all up there on the wall, and Martin and Bonhoeffer and Desmond Tutu, they're all there. And many of them, most of them didn't have secular wins. But they still inspire me after all these years. So this isn't about winning, or it certainly isn't a quest for power, which is my biggest critique of the Christian nationalists. The will to power is not the way of Jesus. It just isn't. But what if this moment, and I don't know how, so I can't answer that. What if this moment where the teachings of Jesus did not win in this election? In this moment, Other things won. But in this, what if this moment now that we're in, what if that could help remind us as Christians the kind of movement that we're in? What if there could be a deeper hunger for Jesus, despite the results of the election, than we ever had before? That's a great way to pastor people. The first 300 years of our movement were this countercultural movement before it got institutionalized. 300 years. These followers felt like they were trying to change the culture. Their counterculture. They had this thing called the Beatitudes. I'll just say this quick story of a bishop in one of our mainline churches that I was having lunch with during the campaign. She said, I'm getting my pastors in there saying they're getting all this terrible pushback and feedback, even threats from congregants who are, and I didn't say Trump, I didn't say Biden back then, I didn't say election, I just put a scripture in the Sunday bulletin, and they said it was undermining of their favorite candidate. I said, and the bishop said, what was the scripture? He says, the Beatitudes. So, what if this moment brought us back to the Beatitudes? The way of Jesus. That's the best way to pastor people who voted in this election for all kinds of reasons. Some out of the fear that it inspired. I was with a wonderful community organizer who's a longtime friend of mine, a veteran, during the campaign. And he said this, he said, fear shuts off part of our brain. I said, what? Yeah, when fear sets in, our brain waves change. It goes from our cerebral cortex, which is our rational thinking, the part of our brain in the back, which is about fighting and fight, flight, save yourself. So I just quoted him in one of these talks, and afterwards, a doctor comes up to the book table and says, he's right, I'm a doctor. We put people through MRIs, we can see their brain waves change. In that big chamber, that chamber that you sit in, it's scary to be in that chamber, and then the results could change or end your life. And we monitor the brain waves changing from the cerebral rationality to the irrational fight, flight, fear. And fear was just triggered all over the place in this election. Which brings another text of Jesus. He says, you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Yeah. So I went into that more deeply, and I finally understood for the first time that the opposite of truth isn't just lies, it's captivity. It's captivity. Fear and truth are indivisible. Freedom and fear and truth are indivisible. And there's a whole lot of people out there that I know, I was raised with, and many of them are good people, but they're captive to lies. They're just captive. So instead of pointing our finger and telling them they're this, that, and the other, how do we set our people free who are captive to lies? That's a pastoral task. I've talked to a lot of journalists this last several months, and we often would talk after the interviews, and they would want to tell me that their vocation, they want their vocation to be truth tellers. That's the best of what they're supposed to be, and a lot of them are trying hard. And I said, that's also a clergy vocation, to be truth tellers, to tell the truth. But what I'm thinking about now is when I have megachurch pastors, white evangelical megachurch pastors call me and say, I have my people for 2 hours a week if I'm lucky. And certain news networks have them 24/7. I can't compete. And now, many people who voted last Tuesday, they don't even listen to networks and read newspapers, my newspapers for sure. They get their news off websites that have no accountability at all to facts and truth. People just say stuff. And I was sometimes staggered by the stuff that just got said over and over and over again. And sometimes powerful men realize that if they just keep lying over and over and over again, people will start to believe it. News stories often go away after 2 or 3 days, but when I heard in the presidential debate that Haitian immigrants were stealing and eating people's beloved dogs and cats, I rolled my eyes and I just shook my head. It didn't go away. It got deeper and deeper, worse and worse. And note that people being lied about were non-white immigrants. That's who was being lied about over and over again. And the one lying about that said he wouldn't mind Norwegian immigrants. So a Norwegian official showed up at one of my gatherings and said, "We don't want to come." Who's being lied about? Or I love the Good Samaritan parable where this lawyer comes to Jesus and it says he's trying to, test him and trip him up. And my deeper study showed me it was a Washington lawyer. I know that tone of voice. So what do I do to inherit eternal life? Well, Jesus says, I think you know it's in the law. I'm sure you've read it. You love the Lord your God, he said, with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And then you love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, but then the question comes. The most important question for a democracy, especially for a nation struggling to become a multiracial democracy, the most important question, who is my neighbor? Not who is my neighbor, but exactly who is my neighbor? Who am I obligated to? And the title I gave to that chapter in the book about the Good Samaritan was, Your Neighbor Probably Doesn't Live Inside Your Neighborhood. The text says, Jesus, well, I'll give you an example. And he gives the Samaritan as an example. Now, in Judean culture, people didn't think there were any good Samaritans. They were a mixed race. They're half-breed, they're dangerous, they're false worshipers. Stay away from them. In fact, there were rumors that there were Samaritans in Mexico coming across the border with guns and no, that's a different group, sorry. But they were othered like that. They were othered, people who were othered. Samaritans were othered. And here's an other helping a man by the side of the road whom Jewish scholars convinced me was Jewish, an other helping someone other to him. Jesus says, that's my example. So instead of turning neighbors into enemies, doing a trajectory of fear and hate and even violence, Jesus says, love your neighbor. First, love God, but then love your neighbor as yourself. Who is my neighbor is going to be the question. And so our preaching and teaching should be helping people understand who their neighbors are outside their neighborhood and their culture. None of why we're segregated is accidental. My dad came back from World War II in the Pacific on a ship, engineering officer, and when he got back home, GIs like my dad got an FHA loan for their first house, GI Bill for education. And when you get education and housing, you're middle class. My government made us middle class. No black sailors on his ship got an FHA loan or a GI Bill. No black GIs did. And that's why my neighborhood was all white, my school was all white, and that's why my church was all white. It wasn't accidental. We had been structured out of a relationship to each other. Because moms and dads like to bond over their kids and, hopes and dreams and fears and health. But when still today, as I sit here tonight, 80% of white people in America have not one single person or family of color in their inner circle. The bonding that we do and that we encourage as Christians just doesn't happen when we're nowhere near each other. All right? I also learned that Galatians text that we love, Galatians 3:28. There is no Jew or Gentile, bond or free, male or female. We're all one in Christ Jesus. We love that text. I do. You do too. We've preached it forever. I didn't know that text was preached at every single baptism in the early church. That text. As if to say, well, we have these divisions, race, class, gender, that's it. And our mission, our leader says, is to help overcome those divisions, divisive barriers. We're not perfect. We often make mistakes, but this isn't extracurricular for us or a social action committee. This is tied to our mission. And I read and learned that at Fisk University, they have a whole museum of white slaveholder Bibles. Guess what text was removed from every single one of them? Galatians 3:28. The abolitionist movement called it the abolitionist text. Would I love to see us preach Galatians 3:28 now at all of our baptisms? So I want to not point fingers. I want to go back to the text. The text. The text. Speaking of retired bishops, a dear friend of mine just retired from your church, Michael Curry. And he would always say to me, Jim, keep going back to the text. The text. A divided church, a politically diverse church. Go to the text. Go to the text. Go to the text. There are reckonings coming for this country, for both Democrats and Republicans, and for our churches who have conformed to this world, as Romans 12:2 warns us against. In the days ahead, though, just rest. It's okay. And as a black preacher said last night, quoting a gospel song, sometimes it's okay not to be okay. It's okay not to be okay. Offer lots of hugs, take deep breaths, and walk in God's natural world. And two scriptures that I keep in the last few days going back to. One is Micah, when we ask, how do we talk to people who see things so differently or who voted so differently? I hear that, how could it be so close? Micah says, what does the law require of you? To do justice. And I'm glad that comes first. The God of the Bible is not a God of charity, it's a God of justice. Do justice. But then it says, love kindness. And then walk humbly with your God. I want to say that we social justice advocates sometimes scream justice, but not so kindly. Not with the kindness that Micah is asking us to. Or I'll confess, I'm the oldest I have ever been tonight. And I haven't always got things right. I still don't. And I have to walk humbly, because the best I do and best I can think, best I can strategize, I know I won't always get it right. So do justice, but be kind. And walk humbly. Speak humbly with your friends and neighbors. I'll close with this. I talked about fear. And so I went to all of the scriptures in the Bible on fear. And I heard all the fears about candidates and all the rest. With so much fear in the air, I went back to the scriptures, as we always should, but sometimes don't. God is love, and those who abide in love abide in God, and God abides in them. Love has been perfected among us in this, that we may have boldness on the day of judgment, because he is as we are in the world. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. For fear has to do with punishment, and whoever fears has not been perfected in love. We love because he first loved us. Those who say, I love God and hate their brothers and sisters are liars. For those who do not love a brother or a sister, whom they have not seen, who they have seen, cannot love God, who they have not seen. Psalm 27. I'm reading a lot of Psalms this week. A lot of Psalms. So here's just a couple for you. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When evildoers assail me and devour my flesh, my adversaries and foes, they shall stumble and fall. Though an army encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war rise up against me, I will be confident. Teach me your way, O Lord, and lead me on a path, level path, because of my enemies. Do not give me up to the will of my adversaries, the false witnesses that have risen up against me, for they are breathing out violence. I believe I shall see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait on the Lord, be strong, and let your heart take courage. I will give you one little test of our politics going forward, no matter what, which was my conversion text, which brought me back to Christ. I got kicked out of my little white evangelical church in Detroit because I was listening to my city around me, a teenage kid, watching the news, reading papers. I just had these questions. Something seemed really wrong, really big, and really wrong, and we weren't talking about it in my white world. Why does life seem so different in black Detroit, from what I can see and read, than in white Detroit? Why? I hear there are black churches. I never heard that before. We've never visited, never had anybody come. And the only honest answer I got was, son, if you keep asking these questions, you're going to get into lots of trouble. And that proved to be true. So when I went to my university, I was secular now. When an elder told me, Christianity, son, has nothing to do with racism, that's political, and our faith is personal. That's the night that I left. I didn't have words to go around that until I came back to Christ, which are these. God is personal. If God isn't personal, what's the point? God knows each one of us, all about us, and wants a relationship anyway. God is personal, but never private. And the privatizing of faith is the great heresy of our white Christian tradition and my white evangelical tradition. They're political now over issues they've chosen. But at Michigan State, we'd shut down the university, 1970. A lot of you might remember that. They're real old people like me. But afterwards, I never got shed of Jesus, I guess, because I went back to read the scriptures. On my own, no campus ministers. And I read the book of Matthew. I got to this text in Matthew 25. I call it the "it was me" text. I was hungry. I was a mom with 2 or 3 jobs, but I still needed SNAP, food stamps, and they just cut it. Jesus says, that was me. I was a mom in Flint, and I couldn't get clean water without lead poisoning for my kids. The white moms in the suburbs, they were fine, but not me. I couldn't get clean water for my thirsty kids. Jesus says, that was me too. I was a farmer in Guatemala, and because of climate change, I couldn't grow food on my land anymore. Then this army came to me and said, we want your boy to be a boy soldier. And if you don't give him to us, we'll have our soldiers come gang rape your daughter. So I gathered up what little we had that we could carry, like naked, and walked thousands of miles to this country where we could have asylum. They would take us in, and they took us in, and they took our kids out of our arms and put them in cages by themselves. And we were in other cages, and Jesus says, that was me. That was me and me too. So the one test of our politics going forward is we should have the politics for the least of these. That's who we are. Regardless of our policy preferences or who we voted for, what happens to the least of these? That's our politics. And so, when Jesus says, I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. Now, I know how complicated immigration policy is. I've worked on that with Republicans, Democrats. They've both failed. But when you demean and demonize and threaten to deport millions of strangers, that's contrary, antithetical to what Jesus taught. So when the big deportation happened last time and they separated families from their kids, I got called into a meeting at the Senate. And I was told that there were senators, Republicans and Democrats, of faith, who were really struggling with that policy and didn't know what to do. Democrats were against it, but so were a number of Republicans, and they wanted a private, confidential talk. So in the back office of the senator, it was in his little room so much that we had senators sitting on the floor because nobody wanted to acknowledge their meeting. And we talked about this text, and those kids and families. And that led to more conversations and more, and finally, a letter was sent to the president, then president, saying, we are people of faith. Different parties. We are people of faith, and we are appalled by this, and we're telling you not to do it again. And that's when the thing stopped. Never got press. Other thing that stopped it was these couples came out to the protests, protesting the family separation. And usually when young couples come to protest, they leave their kids at home with a babysitter or a nanny or grandma or something. Now they brought their kids with them, holding their kids in their arms as if to say, these are our kids and those are our kids too. Those are our kids too. So whatever happens in this election, the Jesus test of our politics is what happens to the least of these. So whatever they do, whatever they threaten, we need to be there, all of us as Christians, for the least of these. So I'll close with back to the beginning about going for a walk. When I go for walks, I go back again and again to a psalm that I want to end with tonight. And since we're going to bless each other and love each other and hold each other, could you stand with me and just hold on to each other's hands, just around your tables? And if you would just listen to the psalm. It's my favorite walking song. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He maketh me lie down in green pastures. Despite all my church business. He leads me beside still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness. Quick comment, the word righteousness in the Old Testament is the same as the word justice. He leads me in the paths of justice. For his name's sake. Therefore, when you're walking the paths of justice and righteousness, then it says, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, because thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. In all our activity, remember Psalm 46. Be still and know that I am God. Thank you very much.
Friends, Jim has said that he would be happy to stay and answer some questions. We have a limited amount of time. I want to release us by 9 o'clock. It is 8:51. I'm going to ask the first question, and then we've got microphones that are around. We probably can get maybe 2 more in. And I'm asking the first question because I'm the bishop and I'm selfish. Don't want to waste any minutes. Jim, you have spent a lot of time supporting, developing, building community in all kinds of situations and through different challenges in this country and probably beyond this country. I'm wondering what words of wisdom you can give to us about being faithful community when right now our tendency is to go silent. And in many of our parishes, if anything seems remotely political, we all stop talking. And at a time like this, where we know we've got a wide variety of responses to this election, it strikes me we should be talking more, not less. But our natural default is to be quiet and not speak in order to keep the peace. How do faithful people talk across difference and remain in community together?
Brittany Packnett, a wonderful Black Lives Matter leader, I met in the streets of Ferguson when that was going on. She talked to my class last week at Georgetown. And some of the white students said, how can we join you? We're willing to take the risk and join you. And she said, well, if you want to come into the streets and endure rubber bullets and tear gas and threats on your very life, you're welcome to join. And if you survive, you can say, I was there. The bigger risk for you white folks is to talk to your white families and friends. White pastors, talk to your white congregants. And don't just give them politics, give them the words of Jesus. If they want to deport a million, did you hear that? 1 million immigrants at any price tag, that's a pulpit sermon topic, no matter who anybody voted for. So look for gospel issues, not just political, gospel issues. And we are the ones who have to, we are bridge builders. We have to be. We're also truth tellers. And we can't just do one or the other. People who don't want to build bridges and just want to keep preaching their stuff all the time at their congregations, that's not going to help us. That's not a pastoral task. But if we got to be truth tellers while we're bridge builders, and that takes some risk. I'll tell a quick story. I was at Candler School of Theology at Emory before the book. That's kind of where I conceived the book in this talk. And the next day they had all these pastors from all over the South, young pastors, black and white, to unpack the talk and talk it all through. And there they were from all over the South. And the black pastors do not often feel comfortable, even in ecumenical settings, saying what they really think and really feel. But these black pastors, young ones, had heard the night before and all day, and they said, they pleaded with their white brothers and sisters to tell the truth about race, about our history, about our present. Tell the truth, about pleading, tell the truth. And all of the white pastors, most of whom probably had Black Lives Matter signs on their front yards, their word back to the truth was the risk. The risk it'll be. Female pastor, I need my parsonage to raise my kids. I need my pension. I can't lose. My senior pastor says, when you preach, remember the demographics of your donors. And so truth, risk. And we have to risk telling the truth. Risk telling the truth.
All right, John King has a microphone. Tim in the back has a microphone. And we'll take 2 questions.
Eddie got that. Well, always we begin again. James Baldwin said the fire next time. And then there was also the book, White Fragility. What say thee?
That's a statement, not a question, but you're right. I make all my students read Eddie Glaude's book about James Baldwin called Begin Again. I will submit it to you for your taking a look. Baldwin was very interesting. He wasn't sure about religion, often, but he kept holding out for what he called, James Baldwin, the New Jerusalem. He said that. He never wanted to give up on hope. He said, how can I give up on hope? Or as Brittany said to my kids, how do we have hope, they asked her. She says, hope, not to have hope is a betrayal of my ancestors. My great-great-grandmother who kept 3 generations together during slavery. And I got to be with Children's Defense Fund has a week-long Black Preachers thing every July, and I was there this year with all of them. And I got to have, I often feel like I wish I could call Desmond Tutu and get his advice about things like now. But one of my other elders was there, Otis Moss Jr., who was in the inner circle with Dr. King. Now he's in Cleveland, he's retired. He's in his 90s, and there he was, standing tall, preaching. And here's what he said. We Black church leaders have learned to stand up and remain standing, even when we don't have democracy, or even if this election takes more democracy away from us, we will keep standing tall. And then he stood up, standing tall, in his 90s, preaching. And I needed to hear that from Otis Moss Jr. And the Black church has learned to do that over and over again. Stand up. Keep standing tall no matter what happens. I just don't want Black preachers to have to stand up by themselves.
Amen.
How about a woman? Good choice.
I guess I count. So when I was in Charlottesville, we had an organizer come from Ferguson, Osage Fuseku. I don't know if you know him, but and he taught us organizing principles and passive resistance principles of preservation of life, live to fight another day, and deep abiding love. And all of those in their own way take courage. So how do we, in our congregations here in the Diocese of Newark, at least get to the point of deep abiding love while we are also risking that we are going to have to live to fight another day?
Dorothy Day, paraphrasing John of the Cross, said something like, where there is no love, put in love. Put in love, and love will come back to you. Now, I just mentioned Desmond Tutu, so let me give what I think his answer would be to that. So Desmond Tutu, when they named my new chair at Georgetown after him, I was just so delighted because he was such a mentor and teacher and friend. He taught me my theology of hope. I learned my theology of hope in South Africa. And here's what he said. Hope is not the same as optimism. Optimism is a feeling or a mood, even a personality type, cup half empty, cup half full. And hope is not a mood or a feeling. Hope is a decision you make, a choice you make. Because of this thing that we call faith, Hebrews says, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. My best paraphrase of that is, hope means believing in spite of the evidence and then watching the evidence change. So I'll just share one final story. The first day I was in South Africa, I've been there a lot since. My first day I was invited by Bishop Tutu and others there to build bridges between the American churches and the South African churches. There wasn't much going on between our churches. So I went. And I was told to meet him at the cathedral because I had to be snuck in the country because of all the security stuff. But I got to his cathedral, St. George's in Cape Town. It's just beautiful. It's actually smaller than this room, but a beautiful cathedral. And I walked up, and the place is surrounded by military, 200 or more automatic weapons, rifles and helmets and shields and vests and what in the world's going on? Well, they called for a rally, and they had closed the rally, no rally. So Bishop Tutu says, well, I'm going to have church. Try and cancel that. So I snuck in and sat with some friends, and there he was, beginning to preach. Wonderful man, little man, long flowing robes, looking like Yoda. And he begins to preach, and all of a sudden the front doors of his cathedral are broken into by the South African security police, who are just utter thugs. They line the walls, imagine being in his cathedral. They line the walls of his cathedral with tape recorders and notepads in their hands, as if to say, go ahead, be bold, be prophetic. You just got out of jail, and we'll put you right back in there. My first day. But what they were saying, it felt to me, was, we own this country. We own this church. We own you. We own your God. He bowed his head in prayer. We were terrified. We're surrounded inside and outside. And he's quiet. Finally, he looked up and he smiled that signature Desmond Tutu smile. He began bouncing like a good black preacher from the South. And he waved his arms, so he said, now remember, we're totally surrounded. So, since you have already lost, we invite you today to come and join the winning side. And the young kids leapt out of their seats and danced outside, and we just followed them. And these military didn't know what to do with all these dancing worshipers who weren't afraid. 10 years later, I'm at the inauguration of Nelson Mandela. Guess who's master of ceremonies? I said, Bishop, do you remember that day at St. George's? What you said, what we did. He smiled, he remembered. I said, today they've all joined the winning side, because that day you couldn't find a South African who hadn't always been against apartheid. But I sat there with 150,000 people, tears running down their faces. And I realized that for people of faith, it's okay to be at the party, the celebration, the victory. It's wonderful. But where we're needed is not at the party, but back at St. George's, when you can only see the party through the eyes of faith. That's what he did. He didn't know how long it would take. He didn't know if he'd be there. He didn't know what would happen to him even trying, but he knew the party, the celebration, would come. And he taught me our trajectory, which isn't fear and hate and violence. It's faith that prompts hope, that creates action, which makes change. Faith, hope, action, change. That's our trajectory. And you're going to I'm going to feel, we're going to be surrounded in these next 4 years. We're going to feel surrounded. And I imagine Desmond wanting to take us each aside and whisper something in our ears. Remember, you're on the winning side. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim Wallace. I'm going to turn the microphone over to John King, who has a few announcements.
Thank you, Bishop. Thank you, Jim. That was amazing. A few quick announcements before we call Reverend Ann Kitch up to give us the benediction for this evening. Jim Wallace will be signing books in the back of the room as we conclude, so we have books for sale, and they'll be there, and he'll be happy to sign them for you. And I made an error as I was introducing everybody. I was glancing at tables, and there's one man in this room who should not have been overlooked, Randy Johnson, who sat everybody this evening. And so Randy and I work on this convention every year, and at the dinner, he gets to relax a little bit because he knows that everybody's been seated at both the business session and the dinner session. So way to go, Randy, nice job. And I'd like to call up the Reverend Ann Kitch for our benediction.
remembering William Sloane Coffin. The world is now too dangerous for anything but truth, and too small for anything but love. May your eyes be so blessed you see God in everyone, your ears so that you hear the cry of the poor. May your hands be so blessed that you touch everything with compassion, your lips so you speak nothing but the truth with love. May your feet be so blessed you run to those who need you, and may your heart be so opened, so set on fire that your love changes everything. And the blessing of God, eternal majesty, incarnate word, and abiding spirit be upon you and all of those whom you love and pray for this night and always.
Thank you, everyone. The book signing will be taking place in the back of the room, and continental breakfast will be served here tomorrow morning starting at 7:30. The UBE caucus will be taking place in the conference room C, which is at the exact opposite end of the hotel, starting in just a few moments. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.